My name is Ethan. I'm 47 years old, and for most of my adult life, the woods were the only place I ever felt truly whole. I spent 6 years in the Army, infantry, then came home and poured that discipline into something quieter. I became a wildlife photographer, a guide. I knew the Cascade Mountains in Washington state better than I knew the back of my own hand. I could read the land, understand its language of snapped twigs and bird calls. I thought I knew its every secret. I was wrong. I'm telling this story because the official report is a lie, a neat and tidy fiction to close a file. The truth is something else entirely, and it cost me 2 of my best friends. It cost me the woods. It cost me sleep. It was our annual trip, the first week of October, just us 4. There was me, Cal, Corey, and Brian. We had leased the same remote cabin for 8 years running. It wasn't fancy, just a solid old log structure built in the 50s, miles up a logging road that was barely more than a gravel track. You needed a serious 4-wheel drive to get there, and once you were there, you were committed. No cell service, no neighbors, just 100,000 acres of Douglas fir and silence. That isolation was what we craved, a clean break from the noise of the world. Cal was ex-Marine Force Recon, quiet, steady, the kind of man who never wasted a word or a movement. If you were in trouble, you wanted Cal next to you. Corey had been in my unit in the Army, a natural strategist who saw the world in terms of angles and fields of fire. He was the planner, the one who triple-checked the gear and laid out the emergency protocols we never thought we'd need. And then there was Brian. Brian was my wife's younger brother, a good man, a successful accountant from the city who loved the idea of the wilderness more than the reality of it. This trip was his one chance a year to play mountain man. He was always a little too loud, a little too eager, cracking jokes to cover his inexperience. He was the group's humor, its light-heartedness. We ribbed him, but we loved him. We rolled up to the cabin late Thursday afternoon. The drive itself was a decompression chamber. The pavement gave way to gravel, the gravel to dirt, and the sounds of civilization faded behind us, replaced by the crunch of tires and the low rumble of my truck's diesel engine. We unpacked in practiced silence, a smooth ballet of men who knew their roles. Cal and Corey got the wood stove going and checked the cabin's perimeter, making sure no bears had tried to renovate in our absence. I stowed the food in the bear-proof containers, and Brian, true to form, cracked open the first beers, declaring the official start of our vacation from responsibility. The air was sharp that evening, with a clean, cold bite of autumn at elevation. The sky was a deep, impossible blue. We sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the jagged peaks, painting the clouds in shades of orange and purple. The familiar symphony of the forest started up around us. The chatter of a squirrel, the distant call of a raven, the rustle of the wind in the pines. It was perfect. It was the same peace we had found in this exact spot for 7 years prior. There was absolutely nothing to suggest it would be our last time here. Nothing at all. The first sign that something was wrong came the next morning. It wasn't a sound, it was the absence of it. I woke just before dawn, as I always do. I stepped out onto the porch with a cup of coffee, expecting to hear the forest waking up. The dawn chorus of birds, the scuttling of small animals in the undergrowth. There was nothing, just a profound, unnatural silence. It was so complete, it felt like a pressure against my eardrums. The air was still. The trees stood like silent, black sentinels. I mentioned it to Cal when he came out a few minutes later. He stood beside me, scanning the tree line, his coffee mug steaming in the cold air. He felt it too. His eyes, accustomed to observation, narrowed slightly. "It's quiet," he said. That was all. From Cal, that was a paragraph. Corey came out, stretched, and took a deep breath. Dead, he pronounced. He didn't mean it literally, not yet. He just meant still. Brian was the last one up, grumbling about the cold. He didn't notice the silence. He was too busy making a joke about my coffee tasting like boiled boot leather. For a moment, his normal, loud energy almost made me forget the oppressive quiet. Almost. We decided to do a short scouting loop, check the game trails east of the cabin. We geared up, rifles slung, packs on. As we moved into the trees, the silence persisted. Our boots crunching on pine needles and dirt sounded like gunshots in the stillness. There were no tracks, no droppings, no signs of life. The forest felt sterile, abandoned. It was more than just unsettling. It was fundamentally wrong. A healthy ecosystem is never silent. Never. About a mile from the cabin, we found it. The smell hit us first. The coppery, metallic tang of blood, heavy on the cold air. We slowed our pace, moving cautiously. Corey took point, his rifle held at a low ready. We found the carcass in a small clearing. It was a large buck, or what was left of one. It wasn't a clean kill. It hadn't been fed on by a predator. It had been destroyed. I've seen what bears and cougars do to a kill. This was not that. The animal's ribcage had been broken and bent outwards, as if something had reached inside and pulled. Its legs were twisted at impossible angles, the long bones snapped clean in half. But the strangest part was the head. It had been torn from the spine and was nowhere to be seen. The scene was one of explosive, incomprehensible violence. Brian recoiled, his face pale. "What the hell did that?" he whispered, his usual bravado gone. Cal crouched down, examining the ground without touching anything. "No bear tracks," he said, his voice low and tight. "No cat tracks. Look at the ground here." He pointed. The soil and leaf litter around the carcass were churned up, but the impressions were odd. They were huge, deep, and vaguely man-shaped, but too big, too splayed. "Maybe a grizzly on its hind legs?" Brian offered, his voice wavering. He was trying to find a box to put this in. We all were. "A grizzly wouldn't do this," Corey said, his gaze fixed on the tree line. "This isn't feeding. This is a statement." I didn't know what he meant by that, not then, but the words sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the morning air. We stood there for a long time, the four of us, silent witnesses to a brutality that none of our experience could explain. We decided to head back to the cabin. The hunt was over before it began. The mood had shifted from quiet unease to a low, humming dread. Back at the cabin, we tried to rationalize it. We sat around the rough-hewn table, the wood stove popping and hissing, a futile bastion of warmth against the cold that was now seeping into our bones. Brian, having regained some of his nerve indoors, started talking about local legends, Sasquatch, the Wendigo. He was trying to make it a joke, a spooky campfire story, but his laughter was brittle. Corey wasn't laughing. He was cleaning his rifle, his movements precise and economical. "Whatever did that is big, strong, and not behaving like any known animal in these mountains," he stated, not looking up. "We stay close to the cabin. Nobody goes out alone, not even to take a piss. After dark, we're all inside, doors and windows locked, full alert." Cal agreed with a nod. He was checking the action on his .3006. I found myself doing the same, the familiar weight of my rifle, a small comfort. We were four armed, experienced men, and yet the feeling of being prey was beginning to settle over us. We were trying to apply logic and training to something that felt ancient and utterly contemptuous of both. The rational explanation, a diseased or rabid bear, felt thin, a threadbare blanket against a rising storm. We knew deep down that what we had seen didn't fit, but the alternative was unthinkable. Night fell like a hammer. The darkness that pooled between the trees seemed thicker, more absolute than I'd ever seen it. We had the Coleman lanterns going inside, casting a warm, hissing glow, but it only made the blackness pressing against the window panes seem deeper. We ate our dinner in near silence, the conversation strained. Every gust of wind, every creak of the old cabin's logs made us flinch. It started around 10 o'clock, a heavy, rhythmic tread outside. It wasn't the four-legged gait of a bear or a deer. It was two-legged. Thump, pause, thump, pause. It was circling the cabin, slow and deliberate. We all froze, forks halfway to our mouths. Cal silently held up a hand, then pointed to his ears. We listened. The footsteps were heavy, compressing the earth. Whatever was out there was massive. The circling stopped. Silence descended again, but this time it was worse. It was an expectant silence. We could feel it out there, watching us. Brian was starting to breathe too fast. Cal shot him a look that could have stopped a train. "Easy," he mouthed. Corey had already moved away from the table, taking up a position by the main door, his rifle in his hands. Then came a new sound, a long, slow, scraping noise against the west wall, the one with no windows. It was the sound of something hard, like claws, being dragged across the log siding. It went on for a full minute, a deliberate, grating sound designed to unnerve us. It was working. I could feel the sweat trickling down my back. This wasn't an animal investigating a strange smell. This was psychological. It knew we were in here. It was playing with us. The scraping stopped, and was followed by a low, guttural sound from right outside the door. It was a growl, but not like any I'd ever heard. It wasn't the throaty rumble of a bear. It was deeper, with a wet, rasping quality to it, like air being forced through a throat full of gravel and phlegm. It vibrated through the floorboards, a bass note of pure malevolence. Then the doorknob rattled, gently at first, then harder, a metallic clatter that cut through the silence. Something was testing the door. It was turning the knob. My blood ran cold. Bears don't turn doorknobs. Cougars don't test locks. My mind, which had been desperately clinging to the possibility of a known animal, let go. The thing outside was intelligent, and it wanted in. We spent the rest of the night in a state of siege. We barricaded the door with the heavy table and took up positions covering the windows and the two doors. The creature, or creatures, we couldn't be sure, continued to harass us. There were heavy thuds against the walls, as if a shoulder was being thrown against the logs. More scraping. More of those soul-shaking growls that seemed to come from all directions at once. We stayed awake, backs against the walls, rifles pointed at the dark, waiting for the dawn. It was the longest night of my life. Morning came, not as a bright relief, but as a slow, gray dilution of the darkness. The sounds had stopped an hour or so before first light. We waited, listening, until the sun was fully up before we dared to unbarricade the door. The four of us were exhausted, frayed, running on adrenaline and caffeine. Brian looked like a ghost. Even Cal's iron composure showed cracks around the edges. Outside, the ground told the story. There were tracks everywhere. They were huge, five-toed, and deeply impressed in the soft earth. They were bipedal. The stride was immense, easily twice that of a large man. The toes were long, and ended in deep gouges in the dirt, where claws had dug in. They were not human. They were not bear. They were something else. The cabin walls were scarred with long, deep scratches. The doorknob on the main door was bent and mangled. On the porch railing, there was a single, coarse, dark hair, snagged on a splinter. It was thicker than a human hair, stiffer than bear fur. I pulled it free and put it in an empty shell casing, without thinking. Evidence. For whom, I didn't know. Corey believed we had to leave. Now. "We pack up and we get the hell out," he said, his voice flat. Brian agreed instantly, his eyes wide with terror. But Cal and I hesitated. To run now felt like a defeat, like ceding this ground to whatever it was. More than that, a part of me, the part that had spent a lifetime trying to understand the natural world, needed to know. I needed to see it. It was the worst decision I ever made. "We don't run," I said. "We're 4 men with high-powered rifles. We figure out what this is." Cal nodded slowly. "We track it, cautiously. We get eyes on it, identify the threat. Then we make a plan." Corey argued logically and passionately that we were out of our depth, that this wasn't a threat we were trained for. But in the end, it was 2 against 2, and Brian, terrified as he was, sided with leaving. The stalemate was broken by pride, by that stupid masculine refusal to be chased off. We decided to do one more recon, a short one. We'd try to get a look at it. We followed the tracks. They led away from the cabin, heading deeper into the old-growth forest. The thing moved with an incredible stride, covering ground effortlessly. We moved in a diamond formation, Corey on point, Cal on our 6, me and Brian on the flanks. The woods were still dead silent. We were intruders in a place that had been deliberately emptied. About half a mile in, we found the second statement, as Corey had called it. On a large, moss-covered boulder, a collection of animal skulls had been arranged in a precise spiral pattern. There were deer skulls, a coyote skull, even what looked like the skull of a cougar. They were picked clean, bleached by the elements. In the very center of the spiral was the missing head of the buck we had found yesterday. Its eyes were gone, the sockets dark and empty. This was the final, absolute proof. No animal does this. This was ritual. This was a territorial marker. This was art, in the most horrific sense of the word. It was a message, and the message was clear. You are in my house. You are not welcome. Brian threw up in the bushes. I felt the bile rise in my own throat. This was a thinking, intelligent being of immense power, and it seemed a capacity for symbolic expression. The dread I felt solidified into a cold, hard knot of fear in my stomach. Corey was done. "That's it. I'm out. We are leaving right now." He wasn't asking. He was telling us. This time, no one argued. We turned and started heading back to the cabin, moving much faster now, constantly looking over our shoulders. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. It was a physical pressure on the back of my neck. As we neared the clearing where the cabin stood, the light was beginning to fail. The sun was dropping behind the mountains, and long, dark shadows stretched through the trees. And that's when I saw it, just for a second. At the far edge of the clearing, a shape detached itself from the shadows of the tree line. It was huge, standing upright, easily over 7 feet tall. It was broad at the shoulders, impossibly so, and had a dark, shaggy silhouette. It took 1 step back into the trees and vanished. It was just a glimpse, a fleeting impression of size and shape, but it was enough. It was real. It was there. And it had been watching us. I pointed, my voice catching in my throat. "There, did you see it?" Cal and Corey had seen it too. A dark shape, nothing more. Brian hadn't. He was looking at the ground, just trying to get back. We didn't wait. We broke into a run, crashing through the underbrush, all discipline gone, replaced by a primal need for the perceived safety of the cabin. We slammed the door, bolted it, and threw the table back against it. We were breathing hard, a mix of exertion and sheer terror. The sun was gone. Night had returned. We knew it was coming for us. This time, it wasn't playing. The harassment of the previous night had been a test, an evaluation. Now, it was a hunt. The attack began without warning. There was no circling, no scraping, just an earth-shattering crash from above as something immense landed on the cabin's roof. The whole structure groaned under the weight. Dust and splinters rained down from the ceiling beams. Then came a sound that I will hear in my nightmares for the rest of my life. A furious, tearing sound, like giant claws digging into the roof shingles, trying to rip their way through. Corey started shouting orders, his training kicking in, a point of clarity in the chaos. "Ethan, back door. Cal, main. Brian, stay away from the windows. Flashlights on the ceiling." We aimed our lights up, the beams cutting through the swirling dust. We could see the ceiling boards bowing downwards under the weight. Then a new sound, a shattering of glass. The small window in the kitchen exploded inwards, spraying shards across the floor. A moment later, a second window, the one over the main bunk, blew out. It was creating entry points. It was being systematic. Cal fired a round from his .30-06 through the ceiling. The roar of the rifle inside the small cabin was deafening, the muzzle flash blinding. A furious, pain-filled howl answered from the roof, a sound that was part wolf, part man, and all nightmare. The weight shifted, and a heavy thud outside told us it had jumped down. We scrambled to new positions, trying to cover the broken windows. And in the moonlight, framed in the jagged opening of the kitchen window, I saw it clearly for the first time. It was worse than anything my imagination could have conceived. It stood on two legs, but they were wrong, jointed like a dog's, with reversed knees. It was covered in thick, matted black fur. Its shoulders were immense, a solid wall of muscle, from which hung two impossibly long arms. The arms ended in what looked like human hands, but they were huge, gnarled, and tipped with thick black claws like obsidian daggers. But the head was the purest distillation of horror. It was the long, narrow head of a timber wolf, but scaled up to monstrous proportions. The jaws were packed with yellowed fangs, and its lips were pulled back in a permanent snarl. And the eyes were not animal. They were a burning, intelligent yellow. They were looking at us, studying us, filled with a terrifying, ancient malice. It was real. It was right there. And it was going to kill us all. Brian lost it. All his composure, all his forced bravado, shattered. He let out a choked sob and raised his rifle, aiming at the window. "Brian, no!" Corey yelled. "Stay back from the opening!" But he didn't listen. He was consumed by terror. He stepped forward, wanting a clear shot, his body silhouetted against the lantern light behind him. It was exactly what the creature was waiting for. An arm, impossibly fast, shot through the broken window. It was a black blur. The huge, clawed hand clamped down on Brian's chest and neck. He didn't even have time to scream. The creature pulled. It was an act of obscene strength. Status was plucked from his feet and dragged through the window frame with a sickening crunch of bone and tearing flesh. His rifle clattered to the floor. One scream, high and short, was cut off with a wet, gurgling sound. Then silence. We stood frozen for a heartbeat, stunned by the speed and brutality of it. Brian was gone. Just gone. The creature had used his panic, baiting him into the status. It had outthought us. The shock was broken by Corey's voice, hard as stone. "It's coming through the walls. We're not going to hold this cabin. We have to make a break for the truck." The truck. It was 50 yards away, across the clearing. It might as well have been on the moon. The creature was out there, in the dark, and it had just tasted blood. A status began, a splintering, cracking roar, as the creature began to tear at the logs of the cabin wall next to the door. It was coming in. We didn't have minutes. We had seconds. "The plan is this," Corey said, his voice a low, urgent command. "Cal, you lay down covering fire from the main door. Keep its head down. Ethan, you and I go out the back. We sprint for the truck. I'll cover you while you get it started. Once it's running, lay on the horn. Cal, when you hear that horn, you run. You run and you don't look back. We clear?" We nodded, our faces grim. There was no other choice. It was a desperate, insane plan, but it was the only one we had. Cal moved to the main door, took a deep breath, and nodded at Corey. Corey and I moved to the back door, our hearts pounding against our ribs. "Ready?" Corey whispered. I nodded, my mouth too dry to speak. "Go!" he yelled. Cal threw the bolt on the front door and opened it a crack, immediately firing 2 rounds into the darkness towards the sound of the tearing wood. A furious howl answered him. At the same moment, Corey and I burst out the back door and into the freezing night air. We ran. We sprinted across the cold, damp ground of the clearing, our lungs burning. The truck seemed 1,000 miles away. The night was filled with the roar of Cal's rifle and the enraged howls of the monster. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The creature was a huge, dark shape, momentarily pinned by Cal's suppressing fire, swiping at the air where the bullets were impacting the trees around it. We reached the truck. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. "Come on, Ethan, come on," Corey hissed, his rifle up, scanning the darkness. The key slid in. I turned it. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. My heart stopped. "Again!" Corey yelled. I turned the key again. The engine caught, roaring to life with a sound that was sweeter than any music I had ever heard. I slammed my hand on the horn, the blare cutting through the night. "Cal, go!" Corey screamed towards the cabin. He started firing towards the creature, giving Cal his own covering fire. I saw Cal burst from the front door of the cabin, a fleeting shape running low and status. But the creature was faster. It ignored Corey's shots, seeming to not even feel the impacts of the rounds. It turned and bounded after Cal on all fours, covering the ground with an unnatural, loping gait that was terrifyingly fast. It was status. Cal didn't have a chance. It hit him like a freight train, and the two of them went down in a tangled heap of limbs and fury. I saw Cal try to bring his rifle up, but the creature was too strong. I heard one last defiant shout from Cal, then a sound of heavy, wet impact, and then silence. Corey was still screaming, firing his rifle, emptying his magazine at the beast that was now standing over our friend. "Get us out of here! Go! Go now!" he yelled, yanking open the passenger door and throwing himself inside. I didn't need to be told. I stomped on the gas. The tires spun in the mud, then caught. The truck lurched forward. In the rearview mirror, illuminated by the red glow of the taillights, I saw it. It stood up to its full, terrifying height over Cal's body. It turned its massive wolf head and looked directly at the truck. Its yellow eyes seemed to glow in the dark. There was no rage in them now, just a cold, ancient, and possessive intelligence. It had won. It had defended its territory. It watched us go, as if it were simply allowing us to leave, to carry the message of its existence back to our world. I drove. I don't know how. My body was on autopilot. I drove like a madman down that treacherous logging road, slamming the truck through potholes and over rocks, the suspension screaming in protest. Corey was silent beside me, reloading his rifle with shaky hands, his face a mask of shock and grief. We didn't speak. There were no words for what we had seen, for what we had lost. We drove for what felt like an eternity, expecting at any moment to see that monstrous shape step out of the trees in front of us. But we saw nothing. We finally hit the paved county road at the bottom of the mountain, the tires humming on the asphalt. The sight of a yellow center line, a simple, mundane piece of civilization, was so beautiful I almost broke down and wept. We didn't stop until we saw the fluorescent lights of a 24-hour gas station, a beacon of normalcy in a world that had been turned completely upside down. We stumbled into the sheriff's office in the next town over. It was 3 in the morning. We must have looked like something from a horror movie. We were covered in mud, haggard, wild-eyed. Corey had Cal's blood on his jacket. The deputy on duty, a young man with a tired face, took one look at us and immediately called for his supervisor. We tried to tell them the story. We tried to explain what had happened. As the words came out of my mouth, I could hear how insane they sounded. A 7-foot-tall wolf man. Intelligent, using tactics, tearing people apart. I saw the look on the sheriff's face. It was a mixture of pity and suspicion. He thought we were drunk, or on drugs, or completely out of our minds with trauma. They separated us, questioned us for hours. I told my story, over and over, sticking to every single detail. Corey did the same. Our stories matched perfectly, but it didn't matter. The truth was too monstrous to be believed. They sent a team up to the cabin later that day. They found it, of course. They found the damage. They found the blood. And they found what was left of Brian and Cal. The official story was pieced together with a kind of determined mediocrity. A grizzly bear, they said, a freakishly large and aggressive one. It had been a territorial dispute. We were hunters. We had encroached on its space, and the bear had attacked. It was neat. It was simple. It fit into a box they could understand. Our story was dismissed as a shared hallucination, a product of extreme stress and trauma. They pointed out the empty beer bottles, suggesting alcohol had played a part. They noted that we were all heavily armed, implying we might have been jumpy, that maybe we had even shot each other in a panic. They didn't charge us with anything, but the insinuation was there. We were unreliable witnesses to our own friends' slaughter. The case was closed. Bear attack. We were released the next day. As I was signing some final paperwork, an older deputy, a man with weary lines etched around his eyes, pulled me aside. He walked me to the door, away from the others. He spoke in a low voice. "I've been working this county for 30 years, he said, not looking at me, but out at the street. That mountain, it's got a history. People go missing up there. Hunters, hikers. Every few years, another one. They find a car, maybe a campsite, never a body." He finally turned and looked at me, and in his eyes I saw not pity, but a flicker of grim understanding. "The official reports are always clean. Lost in the elements. Animal attack. Whatever you boys saw up there, you're lucky you got away from it. My advice to you? You take that luck, and you never, ever go back into those woods. You hear me? Some things are better left alone." He clapped me on the shoulder once, a gesture that was both a comfort and a warning, and then he walked away. He was the only person who believed us, and his belief was more terrifying than anyone else's doubt. It meant we weren't crazy. It meant it was all real. The aftermath was a long, slow-motion nightmare. There were the funerals, trying to look Brian's sister, my wife, in the eye and tell her that her brother was killed by a bear, knowing it was a lie. A lie to protect her from a truth she could never comprehend. A truth that would destroy her. That lie sits between us now, a permanent, cold wall. How do you explain to the woman you love that her brother was murdered by a monster from a fairy tale? Corey and I drifted apart. The shared trauma that should have bonded us forever became a chasm. We were the only two people on Earth who knew what really happened that night, and looking at him was like looking in a mirror. I saw the same guilt, the same horror, the same sleepless exhaustion. We reminded each other of the friends we failed to save. We stopped calling. It was easier to be alone with the ghosts. I sold my cameras. I let my guide license expire. The woods, which had been my sanctuary, became a place of profound terror. I can't even walk in a city park at dusk without my heart starting to pound, my eyes scanning the shadows between the trees. The silence I once craved now feels predatory, a held breath waiting to be broken by a scream. The smell of pine needles makes me nauseous. It has taken everything from me. I have nightmares every night. I see those yellow eyes. I hear the sound of bones snapping. I see Brian being dragged through the window. I see Cal going down, fighting to the last. And I see Corey, my friend from the army, the man who saved my life, turning into a stranger because of a truth we can't share with anyone. The survivor's guilt is a physical weight. Why me? Why did I get to drive away? So that is my story. That is the truth. I am telling it now because the lie isn't working anymore. It doesn't honor my friends, and it doesn't warn anyone else. I know that most people who hear this will think the same thing the sheriff did, that I'm crazy or lying. That's fine. I'm not trying to convince everyone. I'm just hoping to convince one person, one group of friends planning a hunting trip, who might hear this and decide to go somewhere else. I'm telling this because you need to know that the world is not what you think it is. We live on a well-lit stage, and we spend our lives believing it's the whole world. But beyond the lights, in the darkness, there are other things, older things, and they watch us. They have territories, and they defend them. We are not at the top of the food chain, not everywhere, not always. So please, listen to me. Stay out of the deep woods. Stay out of the places where the silence is too loud. Stay in the light. Because if you're lucky enough to see what I saw and live, you'll spend the rest of your life wishing you hadn't. You will never feel safe in the dark again.